Morning guys, welcome to Formula 1 news. A major development possibly in this year's championship battle, as it's been reported the FIA introduced a new technical directive that came into effect before the Imola Grand Prix weekends that has at least something to do with controlling temperatures around the wheels. This has been a major talking point around McLaren's advantage over the last few weeks, and is it no coincidence therefore they turn up to Imola and the advantage is nowhere near what we saw back in Miami. McLaren say nothing to do with us, we had to change zilch on our car. Does anyone believe them? Very much interested in your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I greatly appreciate it. We have plenty to get into today, and we will begin with talking about where I was for the last few hours actually, because this video is far later than usual. As you know, I've been on a flight for the last 10 hours getting out here to Dallas, and I thought, do I do it this morning with less information, or do I just save it for the evening when I get to the hotel? That's what I'm doing now. I'll try and keep you guys as best I can in the loop over the next few days, as I did last time I was in Dallas a couple of months ago. Content around the Grand Prix is going to be a bit trickier. We'll see how it goes. But yes, we are here, and I've still got a video for you today just about. So, F1 are partnering with Disney, and that's all I'm going to say on that. What I wanted to get into, though, was this massive drama that's developed over the last couple of days around Jack Doohan and this parody account. Now, if you guys haven't seen any of the content and the context around this, let me just paint a bit of a picture. Argentinian fans in sports in general are, let's say quite passionate for, for good and for bad. Sometimes it can go too far, I think many would argue. And anyway, Colapinto fans have been giving Jack Doohan a lot of stick, even while he was a driver for Alpine. He was getting lots of social media attacks, we even understand to some degree, against him because, lots of Argentinian fans wanted him gone in favour of putting Colapinto into the car. That's now happened, but the drama has certainly not gone away. So you guys may remember that a couple of weekends ago when Doohan was dropped, Mick Doohan, Jack's very famous motorbike racing father, did an Instagram post where he compared Gasly with Doohan to kind of make the point, he was defending his son to some degree, but Doohan has a history of making Mick Doohan Instagram post about his son. Then, during the Grand Prix on the Imola Grand Prix weekends, the qualifying one session, when Colapinto put it into the wall, this is what we saw, and, well, it was Mick Doohan putting very impressive. Now, this is fake, right? This is not real. He didn't actually say this, and I remember that I had the tweet from Formula Fakers. It was like I had it scheduled in my video as part of the tabs I was going to run through, and as I clicked on it, I was like, this isn't real. So let me check if this is real. And I checked, and it wasn't real. But, this was pretty good. Like, it looks like it could be legit. I understand why people were fooled into thinking this was real. I didn't mention it in the video because I like to think I have some sort of journalistic integrity, although I don't consider myself a journalist, but real journalists most certainly should. And that's really, I think, where the criticism belongs, because at the end of the day, do Formula Fakers as an account, like, they're a parody account, do they deserve some criticism here for putting this out, knowing the potential implications and consequences? Sure, I think the implications I would make is that this account was not labelled parody accounts before, and it probably should have been, because this has been a thing on Twitter for some time. You can label your account as a parody. They didn't do that, probably just so, the tweets have a higher likelihood of being seen as legit, and therefore people will give them a reaction, which is kind of what it's all about. But, look, this blew up, obviously, because people thought Mick had said this, and then deleted it, taking the piss out of Colapinto, crashing, obviously, after having replaced his son. And, well, it was all going on, because then people started to realise, okay, actually, no, Mick Doohan didn't say this, and Formula Fakers did this tweet at the time: outrage as Argentinians discover that fabled Twitter account Formula Fakers posts fake news, which of course is exactly what the account does. But it was all causing drama yesterday because Alpine came out with a statement and said, we've, got a great F1 team with fans and passion, and they're enthusiastic. We encourage everyone to remember that behind the visor of these superhuman athletes, there is a person, an individual with feelings, family, friends, and loved ones. As a team, we cannot condone online abuse and urge all fans of this sport we love to be kind of respectful. So, as you might expect, some of the Argentinian fans, having seen what they thought was a tweet or an Instagram post from Jack Doohan's father, they were going on a tirade, right? Like the posts, the emails, the tweets, the DMs, I don't know. I'm sure that it was chaos behind the scenes, because that post blew up. That post got like millions of views and was amplified by none other than the Argentinian press. And this is what I'm talking about, right? This post was not real, but somebody in the media picked up on this as if it was real, and they ran with it as if it was real, without doing the proper due diligence, which I just find outrageous, because you know, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to look at the original tweet, where it came from, and see that it came from a fake news account that's got a history of posting stuff that isn't real. Like, this is not rocket science, but yet ESPN are running this as if it was a real tweet. We've got Yahoo Sports running it as if it was a real tweet. We've got, what's the next one? I've got another one for you as well here. Yeah, Fox Sports Argentina. That's the screenshot I shared a second ago. They're tweeting this out as if it's legit. And I mean, look, at the end of the day, I think part of this is because probably some of the individuals behind this actually happening wanted it to be real, right? Like, you know, they would like to see it be real for the drama. And look, when I first saw it, I was like, damn, that's juicy. But then I looked at it for more than 2 seconds and I thought, this probably isn't legit. Like, you think Mick's actually tweeting that? Like, you know, look, at the end of the day, Mick Doohan, do parents and do, you know, people who are really close to some of the drivers say stuff and do stuff that's kind of out of pocket? Yeah, but do I really think Mick Doohan would put this out about Colapinto? Like, I don't really think that he would. He would at least give it a little bit of time, you would think. Anyway, this was crazy as far as I'm concerned. And we then had to see, you know, Jack made a post about it because obviously he was getting tagged in loads of stuff and I'm sure he was getting some outrageous messages. And at the end of the day says, look, the source was not Argentine here, so I'm not talking about the Argentine fans necessarily, but multiple Argentine outlets falsely reported that this fabricated image which triggered the online abuse on my family. So it's really crazy stuff. And Formula Fakers actually therefore comes out and does a post on it. And the funny thing is that whatever you think about this Formula Fakers account, this like apology post is far better than the posts you're going to see from the actual media on this. Because, look, the account admits it was a mistake. The Doohan family doesn't deserve to be attacked in any way because, you know, they obviously were for this post and they recognise maybe that as a parody account they should do some better work going forwards to make sure that it's clear. But it's not... You know, the primary blame doesn't fall on the parody account, in my opinion. The primary, you know, blame falls on the media. And then Fox Sports Argentina then came out with another post and they basically apologized for the incorrect thing. But it's like, come on, guys, right? Come on. And this was not the only drama of this Ilco for the last few days, because the same thing happened with Yuki, right? So Yuki put his middle finger up at Colapinto during the, you know, practice session, wasn't very happy with Colapinto's driving, but it happened all the time. Like, Norris threw his middle finger up at Max back in Miami. Like, every Grand Prix, someone's doing it. So it's not a big deal. But as a result, Yuki was getting quite a lot of, you know, flack. And I know that, again, like, look, this, he actually, I think, did throw his middle finger up, right? But a lot of the Argentinian press are running with it, and Yuki was getting loads of comments, even to such a degree that Ben Sulayem himself decided to gain some PR points and put out a statement to say, motorsport is built on compassion, integrity, commitment, whatever he says. I'm not going to read it, but like the point is that I stand in full support of Yuki and Franco, thank them for speaking out against the growing issue, because Franco spoke out against this, right? He said that, look, what some of the fans are doing is outrageous. But it's nothing, it's not Franco's fault what's happening here. But yeah, it's just one of these things. When Franco came back into the sport, I think we all frankly probably could have rather seen this coming. But we've got plenty to talk about elsewhere. This is Charles Leclerc and Ferrari's new kit. This is what they run in Miami. And this time in Monaco, they're running this new version, which is actually cold, I'm not going to lie. I actually really like it. It is very interesting, I will say, to see the Ferrari logo not in... well, yellow, right? But seeing the Ferrari logo with no yellow and the horse in blue is, yeah, a strange one. Like, it's probably to commemorate to some degree Charles Leclerc winning the Grand Prix a year ago. More than likely, that's not going to happen again. But again, right, Ferrari, the car might be terrible, but they're definitely winning the Aura Championship of the season, right? And frankly, it ain't even close. They've cooked this year, and this is kind of a close-up of everything. Again, HP, I mean, look at them go, right? Like, they're even getting the HP colours. Like, Ferrari can say what they want. So the kit is nice. But again, it's this blue and white, which is just... man, HP will got to pay them a special bonus or something if they win the Grand Prix this weekend, because they've even got the Ferrari logo without the yellow. Can you believe it? HP had taken over completely. Shell obviously weren't so happy about that and didn't get the memo. But let's talk about some of the drama with the cars, because this has been the big discussion of the last couple of weekends. Aston Martin were a big story as well back in Imola, because they had a pretty good weekend, all things considered. Their car was actually much faster. Qualifying was excellent. Now, look, yes, they used the mediums that were actually the faster tyre, as it turned out. And that kind of hurt them because then their mediums were used, and therefore in the Grand Prix, when they used the mediums, they had a bit more wear on them and they weren't quite as fast as they might have liked to have been, but it was certainly worth it. And they put themselves in actually a really nice position to score points if it hadn't been for a lot of bad luck not falling in their favour. Alonso ended up in like 14th. He made a couple of great overtakes over the last few laps. It's quite plausible that had the safety car come in earlier, as we thought it might have done, Alonso might have got a couple of points. But yeah, at the end of the day, as frustrating as it was for Fernando, I'm sure there was some optimism to take away that the car's actually better now. They seem to have fixed some of their issues, and they have more upgrades to go. And this is one of the key talking points. Many teams are saying, and this is always the classic point, are we sacrificing this year for next year, or what does that look like? If you're sacrificing this year for next year, it will mean you bring no upgrades at all, which is what Williams are doing. But other teams have a different idea because they say, well, there are some developments we can make on this year's car which still give us some insight for next year, because now the teams know what the regulations are for next year. They've been able to design on them since January the 1st. There may be some elements that they want to understand that are still relevant for next year's car, and therefore they're still going to bring upgrades. And that seems to be Ferrari's argument. Whether that's a fair and just argument from Ferrari, and they're not just clinging on to some long-gone hope that they're going to be able to win the championship, that is a different question. But, you know, Aston Martin, I didn't expect them to do really anything to this car. I thought they would see that it was bad and give up. But no, they are bringing more upgrades. They've got things in the pipeline. And as much as the talk is that Adrian Newey is like full focus on 26, which it seems like he is potentially saying to the team, okay, could we maybe do something on this level, on that level for the AMR 25 so we get some more information about what we're trying to do next year? And Ferrari are in a similar boat as well. They will be bringing this modified suspension. They're trying to get it ready as soon as possible. We heard that they were trying to get it for Silverstone, but this modified rear suspension, they may try and rush it through to get it earlier than that because they think that's the key. Right now, they think after Imola, they know how to set up their car to be competitive in a race, but it's going to cost them half a second a lap in quali. That's basically what we saw in Imola. So that's the problem, because if you're starting P11, P12, even if your race pace is good luck, unless you're around a circuit which is easy to overtake at. And you're never going to win starting from P11, P12. They needed massive safety car intervention for that to even, to get close to the front, really, back in Imola as well. But they will have plans, right? For the upcoming rounds, they will have plans to try and get on top of it. Hamilton was certainly more optimistic after what happened in Imola. But the big drama of the day is around McLaren, Red Bull, and another FIA technical directive. Now, we have seen a lot of these, and we are having more to come. Apparently, there's going to be one in Canada as well. There's going to be, of course, the Spanish major flexi-wing technical directive clampdown. But the FIA have dropped a lot of TDs over the last couple of seasons. Of course, famously, the one that dropped back in 2022, around the floor flexibility and stuff like this, that potentially changed the tide to the battle. That was TD39, was it? There was then TD18 that came in a couple of years ago as well, and then we've seen plenty more since then. I think there's been some further revisions to TD18 and stuff like this. But a new technical directive came into effect before Imola, and we didn't find out about it before the Grand Prix started, only after the fact. And now looking back at things after the fact, it gets real interesting to think about what that might look like. So, after the weekends, Marco said, and justifiably so, that Red Bull's upgrades have worked. McLaren were actually weaker, certainly equal potentially, and maybe even weaker in terms of tyre wear at the Imola Grand Prix. Now, as we said a couple of days ago, there might be something a bit more to this in the sense that there is a feeling that the softer compounds, Red Bull will keep them alive better than the harder compounds, just because McLaren's advantage is on keeping the internal temperatures of the tyre down, and that's less relevant for a softer compared to a harder compound. In Imola, it was the softest of all the compounds, and therefore the chances that it worked for Red Bull as well as McLaren were as high as they're ever going to be. At a circuit where it's the harder compounds, such as Miami, then it's probably going to be a different story if it is true that McLaren are able to keep their rear tyres core temperature in the perfect window and nobody else seemingly can. That's been the big drama of the last couple of weeks. Are McLaren doing anything dodgy? That is the big question. We've talked about their rear brake drama, what that looks like. Of course, it's sitting on the thumbnail. And we've wondered whether they were doing anything against the odds in terms of phase-changing materials, in terms of water cooling the tyres, and all of these theories Red Bull have come up with. Now, I will say, to the credit of Red Bull on some degree, the way that they complain seems to be very effective. Like, they complain in such a way to say, it's not like we're accusing them of cheating, I imagine they word it very well, such that the FIA are kind of forced to give some sort of clarification on the matter, and that often ends up in a technical directive. Now, whether that does anything or not, that is a different question, but it's certainly, Red Bull are good, it seems, at posing these questions that force the FIA to do something. So, Thomas Maher, who's well connected at Red Bull, says, it is understood, and also, shortly after this, the Dutch press, De Telegraaf, said the same thing. So this is coming from Red Bull, right? Red Bull have basically leaked this to the press, as far as I'm concerned. And who can blame them? It is understood a number of technical directives were issued to the teams last week pertaining to skid design, design of wheel bodywork, and tyre treatment. So, this gets real interesting at around about this point. Now, the Telegraph report the same thing, and they say that the new technical directive is relating to wheel bodywork and tyre management. Now, the race put an article out here kind of analysing, okay, what is this? What does it mean? The first TD relates to the measurement of skid block materials, and we kind of know about that stuff. The other one that's relevant, though, is that it did not change any of the FIA's interpretations of regulations, but was instead the publication of a communication between the governing body and Red Bull relating to some questions about devices that could potentially be allowed to help with tyre cooling. It is understood the FIA made clear that a host of design ideas relating to the use of water cooling of wheel assemblies and tyres, plus other systems, would not be allowed. So it seems like they have given guidance as a technical directive to Red Bull on what is and what is not allowed. They have then issued that to all of the teams as well, and the question, of course, is that this happens before Imola. So people are going to wonder whether, hang on a second, they won by like 38 seconds over Max back in Miami. And, after the first stint or so, Max was 18 seconds ahead of second place. Okay, he was helped by the VSC, but it was a very different story in Imola compared to Miami. People were wondering whether anything had changed. Now, McLaren are going to say, absolutely not, we didn't have to change anything at all, and some sources have indicated that they had no competitive impact at all, and McLaren say that it didn't affect us, it wasn't involved. Team insiders are clear that the skid block clarification did not force it to make any change, nor the way that the MCL 39 was run. That was the first part, of course, and they reckon that maybe this part of the skid block materials was aimed at other competitors. But the second part around the tyre cooling and the temperature management, that they say has, nothing to do with them, and effectively the FIA has just said that it's clever what they're currently doing, and even Stella said in Imola that it's good news that our rivals are effectively distracted by something else, on something that isn't even present. So, yeah, very interesting. The FIA have issued something to say, look, you can't do this, you can't do that. And, well, obviously the Imola Grand Prix was a very different story. But McLaren are saying, and they're adamant, that they've had to change nothing at all, and it was simply extenuous factors that meant that Red Bull were better, and largely Red Bull's upgrades they themselves brought. So, fascinated to hear your perspective in the comment section below. Just a couple of final things to mention. This is the current weather forecast for the Monaco Grand Prix weekends. And, well, it's possible that it could get kind of interesting. Practice, Saturday, Sunday might be okay, but, there's a possibility of some rain this weekend in Monaco, and that could make things pretty dramatic, in addition to the fact that there's going to be this two-stop race weekend. We'll talk about it more over the coming days, but there's lots of potential strategy implications. The big one for me is, because if you guys aren't aware, Monaco, unless it rains, it's going to be a guaranteed two-stop race. You have to stop twice. And that creates some very interesting options where potentially a car near the back could pit twice on lap 1 and lap 2, and then not have to stop again for the rest of the Grand Prix, and potentially could gain loads of places by doing it, by managing tyres. I think somebody's going to go for that. Somebody's going to try that. But, yeah, I don't know who it's going to be as it stands. These are the power rankings on the weekends after people discussing how Norris is still second in the championship. But, I mean, look, it's a long season still ahead. Very much enjoyed your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.